Close your eyes for just a moment and take a deep breath. Can you smell that? The rich, yeasty aroma of warm bread fresh from the oven, mingling with the sharp tang of spices from distant lands. Open your eyes now around you. The cobblestone streets hum with life as merchants call out their wares in a dozen different dialects, their voices rising above the clatter of wooden carts and the laughter of children darting between stalls. This isn't just any marketplace, this is the beating heart of a medieval town, a swirling tapestry of sound, scent, and color that hasn't faded with time, even centuries later. What if you could truly step into that world, not just as an observer, but as someone who feels the rough texture of hand-woven fabrics, who tastes the sweetness of honeyed pastries still hot from the baker's oven, who hears the rhythm of daily life in the clang of a blacksmith's hammer or the whispered gossip of neighbors bartering for goods. This video is your gateway to that experience, a chance to walk through the crowded lanes of history where every sense is awakened by the vibrant energy of a medieval marketplace. These weren't just places to buy and sell, they were stages where society played out its dramas, where cultures collided and blended, where the ordinary and the extraordinary met under the open sky. From the pungent whiff of tanned leather to the melodic cries of street performers, from the dazzling array of dyed silks to the earthy scent of freshly unearthed vegetables, every detail tells a story. And today, we're going to uncover those stories together. You'll discover how the symphony of marketplace sounds revealed the pulse of a community, how the mingling smells could map the trade routes of an entire continent, and how the sights, oh, the sights, could dazzle even the most jaded traveler. This is more than history, it's a sensory time machine, and by the end of our journey, you'll feel as though you've bartered for spices in Constantinople, admired Flemish tapestries, and tasted the first strawberries of summer, all without leaving your seat. So let's turn the pages of time and step into the clamor, the color, and the life of the medieval marketplace. Your adventure begins now. To understand the true magic of the medieval marketplace, you have to see it not just as a collection of stalls, but as the living, breathing center of an entire world. Picture a sprawling square where the boundaries between classes blurred, where a farmer rubbing elbows with a knight wasn't just possible, it was ordinary. Here, a basket of eggs could sit beside bolts of silk from the Far East, and the latest news from the king's court traveled as fast as the price of wool. This was where society's gears turned, where the pulse of daily life thrummed loudest. Consider the laughter rising from a crowd gathered around a juggler or a storyteller. Entertainment wasn't confined to castles or taverns. The marketplace was a stage where minstrels earned coins with ballads of distant battles, and traveling performers spun tales that would become legends. Even justice played out in the open air, with public punishments or disputes settled by the town's mayor right beside the fishmonger's stall. Every transaction, every interaction wove another thread into the fabric of community. And oh, the gossip, secrets traveled faster than merchants' carts. A baker might whisper about a noble family's scandal while weighing flour, or a blacksmith could share news of a rebellion brewing 2 towns over. In an era before newspapers, the marketplace was the internet of its day, a hub of information where rumors and truths collided. For historians, these everyday exchanges reveal more about medieval life than any parchment scroll. The goods sold here didn't just fill bellies or adorn homes. They told stories of global connections, of spices carried along Silk Road caravans, of Flemish wool shaping local economies, of how a single marketplace could link a peasant's labor to a duke's banquet table. But perhaps most strikingly, these spaces were great equalizers. Wealth might dictate what you could buy, but not whether you belonged. A servant saving for a ribbon, a merchant haggling over Venetian glass, a monk selecting herbs for remedies, all were part of the same human symphony. That's why when we recreate these scenes today, we're not just recalling history. We're stepping into a space where the past feels alive, where the echoes of bartering and banter remind us how much and how little has changed. The air buzzed with a symphony of commerce, not the sterile beeps of modern checkout lines, but a vibrant chorus of human voices and hands at work. Imagine standing near a spice merchant's stall as his voice cuts through the din, booming over the crowd. Pepper from the Levant, cinnamon so fresh it'll make your purse weep. Every seller had their own cadence, a rhythmic call and response honed through years of practice. These weren't mere advertisements, they were performances where volume and flair could mean the difference between a day's profit or empty pockets. Listen closer, and you'd catch the back and forth dance of haggling, the heartbeat of the marketplace. A fishwife might scoff at a customer's first offer, theatrically clutching her chest as if wounded, while a shopper countered with equal dramatics, insisting the price was robbery. This wasn't rudeness, it was ritual. Bargaining required wit, patience, and a touch of humor. Even children learned the art early, watching their parents negotiate for everything from shoes to salted herring. The best hagglers knew when to feign walking away, when to flatter, when to sigh, and finally shake hands, sealing the deal with a grin. Beneath the human voices ran a percussion of industry, the steady thump of a cobbler's mallet shaping leather, the clang of a coppersmith's hammer, the scrape of grain being poured into sacks. Each sound marked a trade's identity. A blacksmith stall rang with metallic strikes, while a weaver's shop offered the softer whisper of thread through a loom. Travelers could navigate the marketplace blindfolded, guided by these auditory landmarks, and then there were the coins, tiny, precious clinks as silver changed hands, each one a small celebration of trust sealed. But the marketplace wasn't just business, it was theater. Hawkers employed rhymes, jokes, even song to lure customers. A fruit seller might chant about his apple's sweetness in a tune so catchy, bystanders couldn't help but hum along. Street musicians wove through the crowd, their fiddles or pipes adding melody to the chaos. And when a dispute arose, perhaps over the weight of cheese or the quality of ale, the entire lane might pause to enjoy the spectacle, cheering on the loudest or cleverest participant. These sounds painted a map of connection. The accent of a wool trader from Flanders, the unfamiliar lilt of an Italian glass merchant, the thick dialect of a local farmer, all overlapping in a living testament to how far and wide commerce stretched. In an age before machines, the marketplace thrived on human noise, the clamor of deals, the laughter shared over a shared jug of cider, the universal language of someone shouting, "Make way for the cart." Centuries later, those echoes still remind us that commerce was never just about goods. It was about people, their voices, their stories, their unshakable drive to connect. The rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil was more than just noise. It was the heartbeat of medieval industry. Step closer to the blacksmith stall, where sparks danced like fireflies in the daylight, and you'd witness a kind of alchemy. Iron glowed red-hot under the smith's skilled hands, bending to his will as he shaped horseshoes, hinges, and plow blades, objects so ordinary yet vital to survival. Each strike told a story, the double tap pause before a finishing blow, the steady tempo for reforging a cracked axe head, the rapid fire strikes when apprentices worked alongside their masters. This wasn't just metalwork, it was music, a language understood by everyone from farmers needing tools to knights awaiting armor repairs. Nearby, cobblers added their own staccato rhythm, the tap-tap-tap of tiny hammers securing nails into leather soles. Watch how they'd pause to run a thumb along the edge of a boot, checking for imperfections with the care of an artist. Their stalls smelled of beeswax and tanned hides, stacked high with shoes for every station in life, sturdy brogues for laborers, delicate pointed poulaines for the wealthy, even pattens, those elevated wooden platforms that kept feet dry in muddy streets. A good cobbler didn't just sell shoes. He was a medieval podiatrist, measuring feet with knotted strings and adjusting lasts to prevent blisters after miles of walking cobblestones. Then there were the weavers, their looms clicking like wooden metronomes as shuttle threads flew back and forth. In an era before factories, every inch of cloth represented hours of labor: wool from local sheep, flax spun into linen, or if you were lucky, silk traded at staggering cost from the East. The weavers' fingers moved with hypnotic precision, their patterns whispering of distant lands, maybe a Flemish twill, a checkerboard popular in England, or intricate brocade copied from Italian designs. Customers would hover nearby, debating whether to splurge on dyed fabric, scarlet from madder root, deep blue from woad, knowing bold colors declared status as loudly as a herald's trumpet. These artisans weren't just vendors, they were educators. A blacksmith might explain why his nails wouldn't rust like a competitor's, while a potter demonstrated how to test glaze quality by tapping a jug's rim. Skills passed openly from master to apprentice, with children often perched on barrels, wide-eyed as they absorbed trades that would feed their own families one day. And always, the sounds wove together: the hiss of hot metal dunked in water, the snap of taut loom threads, the sandpaper rasp of a carpenter's plane, a symphony proving that even in an age of castles and cathedrals, progress was built by calloused hands. Between the spice merchant's shouts and the blacksmith's hammering, a lute's lively strumming would cut through the din, your signal that a troubadour had claimed his stage. These wandering performers weren't just background noise. They were the medieval equivalent of viral content creators, armed with songs that could make a crowd weep over a knight's doomed love or roar with laughter at a bawdy tale of a drunken monk. Picture a juggler sending wooden pins spinning overhead while children squealed, their parents tossing pennies into his hat. Nearby, a minstrel might belt out the latest scandal from the royal court, his lyrics dripping with enough double meanings to avoid the sheriff's wrath while still delighting listeners hungry for gossip. Music in the marketplace wasn't merely entertainment, it was the era's social media. A catchy tune about a local lord's misdeeds could spread across towns faster than a galloping horse, turning rumor into reputation. Troubadours from Provence brought romantic ballads that made noble ladies sigh, while grittier minstrels adapted them into tavern-worthy versions with cheeky twists. Even sacred stories got the performance treatment: mystery plays enacted Bible tales with comedic flair, complete with a bumbling Herod or a devil who tripped over his own tail to the crowd's delight. And the instruments: the reedy whine of a bagpipe marked a Scottish trader's stall, while a German fiddler soared out dances that had farmers jigging in clogs. Drums pounded like heartbeats during acrobats' flips, and the metallic jingle of a fool's bells announced his arrival before he'd even told a joke. Street performers knew their audience intimately: a ballad about harvests for farmers at dawn, a heroic epic for merchants winding down with ale at dusk. But the real magic: how these artists wove immediacy into their craft. A minstrel might tweak lyrics on the spot to mock a heckler or praise a generous patron by name. News of a battle's outcome: by afternoon it'd be immortalized in verse, turning history into something you could hum. When coins were scarce, a song was currency. A traveling performer might accept a loaf of bread or a mug of cider as payment, binding art and survival into one lively, unbreakable thread. You couldn't escape the animals in a medieval marketplace, not that anyone wanted to. The bellow of an ox straining under the weight of a grain cart blended seamlessly with the shouts of merchants, while chickens in wicker cages clucked indignantly at being jostled by passing shoppers. Dogs wove through the crowd like furry thieves, noses twitching for fallen scraps of sausage or crusts of bread, their tails wagging hopeful negotiations with anyone holding food. Livestock auctions turned the marketplace into a temporary theater of rural life. Farmers paraded their finest sheep with wool so thick it looked like clouds on legs, or hogs fattened on autumn acorns, their squeals piercing the air. The auctioneer's rapid-fire chant, part poetry, part arithmetic, drew clusters of bidders, their hands rising in subtle gestures known only to regulars. A good plough horse might fetch more than some peasants earned in a year, its teeth examined like jewels, its gait assessed with the scrutiny of modern car buyers kicking tires. Then there were the less glamorous but vital creatures. Geese hissed at stray fingers near their pens, their feathers destined for quills or bedding. Pigeons cooed from rooftop perches, both pests and potential meals. Even bees played their part. Apiaries set up near honey cellars buzzed like tiny, winged shopkeepers advertising their wares. The sounds told stories beyond commerce. A cow's mournful lowing might signal a calf separated for sale, while the frantic bleating of goats tied to a cart revealed an impending journey. Butchers' yards added their own grim chorus, the shuffling of hooves on sawdust, the occasional panicked cry, a reminder that survival in this era demanded confronting life's harsher rhythms head-on. Yet animals weren't just products, they were partners. Teamsters coaxed oxen with affectionate curses, their bond forged through miles of muddy roads. Watchdogs dozed at merchants' feet, earning their keep by growling at nighttime thieves. Even the crows that swooped down for discarded apple cores were part of the ecosystem, their raucous calls serving as nature's cleanup crew. This symphony of snorts, clucks, and bellows did more than fill the air. It wove the marketplace into the wider tapestry of medieval life, where human and animal fates were inextricably linked. Every bray, every whinny, every contented purr from a stall cat reminded visitors that civilization wasn't built by hands alone, but by hooves, paws, and wings too. Before the first rays of sunlight touched the cobblestones, the bakers were already at work, their ovens glowing like miniature suns in the pre-dawn darkness. That first deep breath of morning air carried something magical. The warm, golden scent of rising dough, a fragrance so potent it could rouse sleepers from their beds and guide them through foggy streets like an invisible thread. This wasn't just breakfast, it was alchemy, turning humble flour and water into the very symbol of sustenance. Step inside a bakery and the heat would hit you like a wall, a welcome embrace on chilly mornings. The master baker, sleeves rolled to his elbows, wielded a long wooden peel like a scepter, sliding loaves into the oven's fiery mouth with the precision of a knight jousting. His apprentices, flour dusting their brows like premature gray hairs, kneaded massive mounds of dough, their hands moving in a rhythm older than the cathedral bells. Each loaf told a story. The dense, dark rye speckled with bran for field workers who needed staying power, the softer wheat loaves for merchants breaking their fast with cheese and ale, the delicate manchet rolls, snow white and feather light, reserved for nobility's tables. But bread was more than sustenance, it was a ledger of society. The size and quality of your loaf announced your place in the world as clearly as your clothing. Laws even regulated bakers' scales to prevent cheating the poor, because tampering with bread wasn't just theft, it was a sin against community. Watch how a laborer might cradle his coarse loaf like treasure, tearing off chunks to soak in pottage, while a noble servant carried a basket of fine rolls wrapped in linen to keep them warm. And oh, the variations: honey-glazed buns studded with dried fruits for feast days, savory rye loaves baked with caraway seeds to aid digestion, even trencher bread, stale rounds used as edible plates, soaking up juices from meats until they became meals themselves. The baker's craft extended beyond mere loaves. His stall might offer gingerbread shaped like animals for children, or spiced fruitcakes so dense they could last through winter. The smell was the marketplace's first greeting, a universal language. A whiff of that yeasty perfume could make a homesick traveler tear up, or spark a child's impatient dance as they waited for the morning's first hot roll. In a world without clocks, the baker's chimney smoke was the true town bell, a signal that another day's dance of commerce and connection was about to begin. Follow your nose past the bread stalls and the butcher's block, and you'd stumble into a realm where the air itself seemed to shimmer, where every breath carried whispers of distant jungles, sun-baked ports, and caravan routes stretching halfway across the known world. The spice merchant's quarter was a sensory kaleidoscope, each stall a treasure chest of fragrances so potent they clung to your clothes for days. One whiff of peppercorns, still dusty from their journey along the Silk Road, could make a nobleman's cook weep with joy, while a pinch of saffron, worth its weight in gold, turned humble rice into a dish fit for kings. These weren't just seasonings, they were status symbols as coveted as silk or jewels. A lord might flaunt his wealth by sprinkling nutmeg on his ale, while a merchant's wife could signal her sophistication by wearing pomanders stuffed with cloves to ward off plague odors. The apothecary's stalls blurred the line between pharmacy and perfumery, their wooden drawers labeled with cryptic scripts offering everything from ginger for digestion to frankincense for pious contemplation. Watch how a customer's eyes would widen as the merchant revealed a knotted cloth bundle, untying it with theatrical slowness to release the musky aroma of cardamom or the citrusy punch of cubeb pepper, spices most people knew only from travelers' tales. But the true magic lay in the stories these scents carried. That cinnamon stick, it might have passed through Venetian warehouses after a voyage from Ceylon, its bark peeled by workers who sang harvest songs under monsoon skies. The peppercorns rattling in a brass scale could have crossed deserts on camelback, evading bandits and tempests to reach this very stall. Even humble caraway seeds spoke of connectivity, tossed into bread or cheese across Europe, their licorice-like tang a tiny rebellion against blandness in an era before refrigeration. And the merchants themselves were walking encyclopedias of flavor and remedy. They'd explain how cloves numbed toothaches, why wealthy ladies craved galingale in their wine, or how to tell true cinnamon from cheap cassia bark by the way it curled. Their stalls became impromptu classrooms where housewives learned to combat winter's chill with ginger tea, and sailors stockpiled anise to mask the taste of stale ship's biscuits. The spice's allure wasn't just culinary or medicinal, it was mystical. A whiff of myrrh could transport you to biblical times, while ambergris, that rare whale secretion washed ashore, lent perfumes an otherworldly depth. To inhale these scents was to touch the edges of the map, to taste the exotic in a world where most would never travel beyond their village borders. No wonder the spice trade sparked wars, inspired explorers, and turned dusty market lanes into portals to the fantastical. Long before globalization, every pinch of cumin or star anise proved the world was vast, strange, and irresistibly interconnected. The butcher's stall was not for the faint of nose, a place where the metallic tang of fresh blood mingled with the earthy musk of sawdust strewn across the ground to soak up spills. Great sides of beef and pork swung from iron hooks, their surfaces glistening in the morning light as the butcher's cleaver came down with a decisive thunk, separating rib from loin with practiced ease. Chickens, plucked and pale, hung in neat rows like feathered currency, while sausages coiled over the counter like savory snakes, their casings taut with seasoned fillings of herbs and offal. This was where the reality of medieval sustenance laid bare: no shrink wrap, no sterile packaging, just the visceral truth of meat as a living creature turned into tomorrow's stew. But the true assault on the senses came from the fishmonger's domain, where the briny sting of the sea clung to every surface. Silver-scaled herring lay piled high like glistening treasure, their gills still flushed pink with freshness, while eels slithered in wooden tubs, their slick bodies coiling around each other in a last futile dance. Oysters gaped in rough baskets, smelling of tidal pools and storms, their shells promising pearls or supper. The fishwife's hands moved with the speed of a card sharp, gutting mackerel with a flick of her knife and tossing the entrails to a waiting cluster of cats, their yowls adding to the cacophony. Preservation was its own olfactory symphony. Smoking Lent meets a deep, woody perfume, hams and sides of bacon hanging in sooty rafters, their fat rendered golden by slow-burning applewood or oak. Salted cod, stiff as boards, stacked like pale bricks and smelling of the distant North Atlantic shores where fishermen braved icy waves to haul them in. Vinegar's sharp bite rose from barrels of pickled herring, a tangy counterpoint to the funky ripeness of aged cheeses sharing the stall. These smells, though overwhelming to modern noses, were the scent of survival. A butcher's skill could mean the difference between a tender roast and a stringy, wasted cut, his knowledge of anatomy as precise as any surgeon's. The fishmonger's nose, trained to detect the faintest whiff of spoilage, was the community's first defense against foodborne illness. Even the flies buzzing over the counters played their part, their presence an unspoken timer urging shoppers to hurry their meat home before the heat of midday took its toll. And beneath it all, the deeper truth: these odors were the price of connection. The reek of fish meant boats had safely navigated treacherous waters to bring sustenance inland. The smokiness clinging to bacon spoke of careful planning against winter's lean months. The butcher's bloody apron was a badge of honor, proof that no part of the animal went to waste: bones for broth, fat for candles, sinew for thread. In an age before refrigeration, the marketplace's strongest smells weren't just challenges to endure. They were proof of humanity's ingenuity in the endless, fragrant dance between hunger and harvest. Amid the sharp tang of spices and the richness of roasting meat, another fragrance wove through the marketplace, one that spoke of sun-warmed fields and ancient remedies. The herbalist stall was a sanctuary of green, where bundles of lavender hung like purple lanterns, their sweet perfume cutting through the market's heavier odors. Rosemary's piney sharpness stood in bristly bunches beside the silvery leaves of sage, their textures as varied as their uses. This wasn't just a corner for shopping, it was an apothecary's garden, a living library of cures passed down through generations. The herbalist moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew secrets whispered by the earth itself. Watch how she'd pluck a sprig of thyme, crushing it between her fingers to release its peppery scent before explaining how it could soothe a cough or preserve meat. Lavender wasn't just for fragrance, it was strewn across floors to repel fleas, tucked into linens to ward off moths, and steeped in wine to calm restless minds. Every plant had a story, a purpose. Camomile's apple-like blossoms promised peaceful sleep, while feverfew's bitter leaves were chewed to dull migraines. Even something as humble as parsley had its moment, not just a garnish, but a breath freshener for garlic-loving diners and a poultice for bruises. Customers approached the stall with hushed respect, sharing symptoms like confessions. A mother might ask for fennel to ease her colicky baby's cries, while a laborer sought comfrey salve for his cracked hands. The herbalist listened like a healer, her hands sorting through dried petals and roots with the precision of a scribe consulting a sacred text. Some remedies were practical: mint leaves to mask the taste of spoiled food, or rosemary rubbed into woolens to deter moths. Others bordered on magic: mandrake roots carved into protective amulets, or vervain gathered under a full moon for love potions. But the true genius of these stalls lay in their adaptability. The same rosemary that flavored a nobleman's roasted boar might be bundled with juniper and burned in a sick room to purify the air. Sage wasn't just for stuffing geese; its smoke was believed to banish evil spirits, a practice that bridged the gap between medicine and mysticism. Even the humblest weeds had value: dandelion roots roasted as coffee substitutes, nettles boiled into iron-rich tonics for pale, tired blood. The herbalist's knowledge was a tapestry of observation, tradition, and necessity. She knew which plants thrived in monastery gardens versus wild hedgerows, which could be traded for silver, and which were given freely to the poor. Her stall was a crossroads where science and folklore danced, where a bundle of bay leaves might be both a cook's treasure and a charm against lightning strikes. In an age before pharmacies, these fragrant bundles were more than merchandise. They were hope sold by the handful, a reminder that even in the darkest alleys of history, nature offered its remedies to those who knew how to listen. For all its sensory delights, the medieval marketplace had another, less romantic side, one that struck the nose with the same intensity as fresh bread or spices, but far less welcome. The stench of animal waste rose from the ground where horses and oxen had passed, their droppings trampled into the mud by countless feet. Rotting vegetable scraps piled near food stalls, buzzing with flies drawn to the sweet decay of overripe fruit or fish guts tossed aside by the fishmonger. And then there were the people themselves, packed shoulder to shoulder in woolen tunics that might go weeks without washing, their sweat blending with the smoke, dung, and spilled ale underfoot. This wasn't just background odor, it was an assault. The tang of urine lingered near alleyways where chamber pots had been emptied, while butcher's runoff tinted the gutters pink with blood and fat. In summer, the heat turned the air thick, amplifying every foul smell until even the wealthiest nobles clutched pomanders filled with cloves or lavender to their noses. Yet few commented on the stink, not because they didn't notice, but because it was as ordinary as the sunrise. Modern noses would recoil, but for medieval shoppers, this was simply the price of commerce, the unavoidable flip side of the vibrant, living marketplace they relied on. The lack of sanitation shaped habits in ways we'd find startling today. Sawdust scattered over butchers' floors soaked up blood, only to be swept out and replaced, a crude but effective system. Garbage collectors, often women or older children, hauled refuse to the edges of town, though much of it simply piled up until rain or stray dogs dispersed it. And while some cities had ordinances against dumping waste into streets, enforcement was spotty at best. The wealthy might douse themselves in rosewater or carry scented sachets, but for most, enduring the reek was just part of daily life. Yet even the foulest smells served a purpose. The rancid butter seller's stall might disgust passers-by, but his wares were prized for waterproofing boots or soothing burns. Tanners, relegated to the outskirts due to their noxious vats of urine and animal brains, produced the leather that shod horses and bound books. The stench of a crowded market also carried social cues, a reminder to keep moving, to barter quickly, to avoid areas where the air grew too heavy with decay. This olfactory duality, perfume and putrescence, wasn't hypocrisy, it was honesty. The marketplace didn't hide its grit behind glass counters or air fresheners. It laid bare the messiness of survival, where the sweetness of honey and the reek of offal coexisted without apology. To walk those streets was to accept life as it was, vibrant, pungent, and unvarnished. The smells we'd now consider unbearable, they were proof the marketplace was alive, a place where nothing went to waste, not even the waste itself. Step into the clothing section of the medieval marketplace, and you'd swear the rainbow itself had been unraveled across the stalls. Bolts of fabric rippled like banners in the wind, crimson wool from England's finest sheep, azure linen dyed with woad from French vats, emerald silks that had traveled farther than most people ever would. This wasn't just commerce, it was a living gallery of craftsmanship where every hue told a story of geography, chemistry, and social climbing. The wealthy might commission entire wardrobes, but even a farm wife could splurge on a single strip of saffron yellow ribbon to brighten her coif, proving luxury came in all sizes. Dyers guarded their recipes like state secrets, knowing the difference between a muddy orange and a vibrant vermilion could make or break a family's trade. The most prized colors came from improbable sources: murex snails bleeding imperial purple, lichens yielding earthy ochre tones, even crushed insects from distant deserts producing the perfect scarlet for cardinals' robes. A merchant might demonstrate color fastness by rubbing wet cloth vigorously, showing how his madder red wouldn't fade like cheaper imitations. Meanwhile, tailors and seamstresses hovered nearby, fingering fabrics and mentally calculating how much yardage it would take to fashion a new tunic or gown. Social hierarchies played out in textures as much as tints. Rough homespun marked the laborer, while butter-soft lambswool declared its wearer someone who never toiled in fields. Silk was the ultimate flex, imported at staggering cost from the East. Its production so mysterious Europeans believed the threads grew on special trees. But clever merchants found loopholes. Blends with cheaper flax let middle-class wives mimic the sheen of nobility, just as pepper dust, ground black wool, could darken fabric for mourning without the expense of true jet black dyes. Regional specialties turned stalls into cultural passports. Flemish woolens, renowned for their tight weave, competed with lighter Italian worsteds. A German merchant's wife might seek out the distinctive checked linens of her homeland, while an English knight looked for the particular shade of Lincoln green favored by archers. Even accessories spoke volumes: a French hood's elaborate folds, a Spanish leather belt tooled with Moorish patterns, or Venetian glass beads sewn onto a bodice like frozen drops of wine. For all its beauty, the textile trade had its shadows. Behind those vibrant stalls lurked back-breaking labor shepherds tending flocks, spinners with permanently crooked fingers, dyers coughing from caustic fumes. The same indigo that made a noblewoman's gown shimmer could stain workers' hands blue for life. Yet when sunlight hit those market stalls just right, turning embroidered threads into flickering gold, it was easy to forget the toil and simply marvel at how humanity had learned to clothe itself in such defiant, dazzling artistry. The produce stalls were nature's own masterpiece, a riot of colors shifting with the seasons like living paint. In early summer, baskets overflowed with strawberries so red they seemed to glow, their sweetness perfuming the air alongside the earthy musk of just dug carrots, their greens still clinging to clumps of soil. By autumn, the palette deepened, burnished pumpkins and apples polished to a waxy sheen, purple-black damsons begging to be turned into preserves, and onions strung into golden ropes that swayed like peasant jewelry. Every hue was a silent announcement of the land's generosity or its struggle. A year of drought might mean shriveled turnips and sparse wheat sheaves, while a bumper harvest turned the market into a tapestry of plenty, with cabbages as big as a blacksmith's fists and grapes bursting through their taut skins. Grain merchants presided over their domain like kings of sustenance, their stalls lined with sacks of barley, rye, and wheat, each variety judged by texture and weight. A farmer might plunge his hand into a sack, letting the kernels trickle through his fingers to test for weevils or dampness, while a baker rubbed flour between his palms to gauge its fineness. Oats, often dismissed as horse feed in the South, were prized in colder regions for porridge that staved off winter's bite. The grain market wasn't just about filling bellies, it was an unspoken ledger of survival. Poor harvests sent prices soaring, forcing families to choose between bread and firewood, while abundance meant festivals where even laborers could afford meat pies and ale. But the real drama unfolded at the vegetable stalls, where haggling took on a theatrical flair. A housewife might scoff at a vendor's price for leeks, only to have him snap back that she'd find none sweeter this side of the Seine. Children sent to fetch onions knew to check for soft spots, while cooks prized cabbages with tightly packed leaves, their density a promise of fewer worms. Herbs sold by the bunch, parsley, chives, thyme were bundled with twine that also served as measuring strings for illiterate shoppers. And woe to the merchant caught hiding rotten apples at the bottom of a basket. Word traveled fast in a marketplace where reputation was currency. The rhythm of these stalls pulsed with the earth's own cycles. Spring's first tender green sorrel, nettles, pea shoots commanded premium prices as antidotes to winter's salted monotony. Midsummer brought cherries so abundant they stained the cobbles where pits were spat, while autumn's quinces and pears were piled into pyramids, their perfumes blending with wood smoke. Even root vegetables, humble as they seemed, held stories. Beets dyed soup the color of cardinals' robes, turnips carved into lanterns for All Souls' Night, garlic braids hung in doorways to ward off illness. What no ledger could capture was the sheer ingenuity these displays represented. Farmers coaxed flavor from stubborn soil using techniques passed down since Charlemagne's time. Gardeners grew medicinal herbs between rows of beans, maximizing every inch. And when scarcity struck, the market adapted. Dandelions became salad, acorns were ground into flour, and even pumpkin seeds were roasted for snacks. To walk the produce lanes was to witness humanity's oldest dance with the land, where every carrot pulled and every grain threshed was a small victory against hunger, a testament to the stubborn, fragrant, dirt-streaked resilience that kept the medieval world turning. Amid the market's clamor, one corner always seemed to catch the light differently, where goldsmiths and silversmiths displayed their wares like fragments of captured sunlight. Here, a merchant might unroll a velvet-lined tray with the solemnity of a priest revealing relics, each piece positioned to make metal dance with fire. A brooch shaped like a rampant lion, its ruby eyes glinting, a drinking cup chased with scenes of the hunt, its silver warmed to honey tones by countless hands. These weren't mere trinkets, they were wearable wealth, the medieval equivalent of walking bank accounts. A noblewoman's girdle might hold enough silver to feed a peasant family for years, while a merchant's signet ring served as both signature and collateral in distant cities. The true marvel lay in how these objects bridged worlds. A humble spoon, its bowl worn thin from generations of use, could bear the same intricate vine motifs as a cathedral's chalice, proof that beauty wasn't reserved for the wealthy alone. Goldsmiths catered to every tier, delicate filigree earrings for burghers' wives, thick arm rings for warriors to hack off as emergency payment, even lead tokens for pilgrims to sew into their cloaks as cheap protection against thieves. Metalworkers were alchemists of practicality and prestige, transforming lumps of ore into objects that whispered, shouted, or sang their owner's station. Watch a smith at his stall, and you'd witness performance art. He might test a coin's purity by biting it dramatically, or rub a silver bracelet against a touchstone to prove its worth. Jewelers employed sleight of hand, two holding garnets near candlelight to deepen their color, or arranging pearls against dark velvet to heighten their luster. Behind the theatrics lay serious skill. the precise hammer taps that turned ingots into wafer-thin leaf for gilding, the steady hands that could solder microscopic hinges for reliquary lockets. Regional styles collided gloriously in these stalls. Byzantine enamel work, its colors baked onto gold like stained glass, might neighbor Frankish cloak pins shaped like writhing serpents. A Moorish merchant's tray held earrings with intricate geometric patterns, mathematical devotion rendered in gold, while a Norse trader's brooches echoed the curves of longships. Even functional items sang with artistry, keys sculpted into dragons, candle snippers shaped like birds' beaks, belt ends that terminated in snarling wolf heads. But the most fascinating pieces often carried hidden stories. A ring with a hollow compartment might conceal a scrap of saint's bone or a lover's poison. Merchant scales, their brass pans polished to mirrors, balanced fairness against fraud with every transaction. And always, always the clink of coins, some freshly minted with the current king's stern profile, others worn smooth by decades of palms, their origins as mysterious as the hands they'd passed through. In a world before paper money, these gleaming objects weren't just adornments. They were the physical heartbeat of trust, power, and human connection. The Pottery Stalls offered a tactile journey through daily medieval life, rough earthen, where jugs with thick, unglazed walls sat beside delicately thrown cups glazed in honeyed amber or forest green. These weren't just containers, they were survival tools. A housewife hefting a wide-bellied storage jar knew its porous clay would keep her grain dry, while a tavern keeper prized pitchers with just the right lip to pour ale without frothing over. The potter's fingerprints often lingered on the rims, subtle ridges where his hands had shaped the wet clay before the kiln's fire locked the form into permanence. Regional styles told stories without words. English potters favored thick slipware decorated with feathery esgraffito scratches revealing red clay beneath white glaze, while Spanish workshops produced lustrous Moorish-inspired pieces with metallic sheens. Functional designs dominated spouted ewers for hand-washing before meals, deep mortars with gritty interiors for grinding spices, even chamber pots discreetly labeled with cryptic symbols to avoid embarrassing mix-ups. But luxury crept in at the edges. A merchant might display a single Italian Maiolica plate painted with cobalt birds, its price equivalent to a month's rent, proof that even the humblest craft could ascend to art when wealth demanded it. Glazes transformed practicality into personality. The rich green of copper oxide signaled a vessel meant for display, while humble lead glaze made everyday bowls easier to clean. Some potters added crushed flint for speckled finishes, others mixed in manganese for deep purples that shimmered like wine in candlelight. And always, the kiln's alchemy brought surprises. A batch intended as pale cream might emerge sunflower yellow due to a shift in the fire's oxygen, turning flaws into coveted rarities. Beyond aesthetics, pottery was pure physics. A cooking pot's rounded base allowed heat to circulate evenly in hearth embers, while storage jars' narrow necks minimized spoilage. Cheese molds bore intricate holes for whey drainage, and candle holders flared at the rim to catch dripping wax. Even children's toys appeared, tiny whistles shaped like birds, their pitches varying with the clay's thickness. The true magic lay in ubiquity. From castle kitchens to peasant hovels, pottery was the great equalizer. A queen's apothecary might store remedies in delicate faience jars, but a scullery maid used nearly identical ones for lard. Broken shards found second lives as writing tablets, garden markers, or even makeshift roofing tiles. In a world before plastic, clay was the original reusable container, fragile but forgiving, capable of being crushed back to earth and reborn in endless cycles of necessity and reinvention. The livestock pens were a world unto themselves, a shifting sea of wool, feathers, and muscle where the raw necessities of medieval life were bought and sold with hands shaken and coins counted. Cattle lowed impatiently as farmers ran calloused hands along their flanks, checking for the firmness that signaled good health, while piglets squealed in woven baskets, their pink snouts poking through the wicker as potential buyers debated which would fatten best on kitchen scraps. This wasn't just shopping, it was high-stakes appraisal, where a missed limp or dull coat could mean the difference between a prosperous winter and empty bellies. Horses commanded their own arena of expertise. Teamsters examined teeth like librarians consulting ancient texts, gauging age by the wear of molars. A blacksmith might test a draft horse's mettle by yanking its tail sharply. A sound animal would plant its feet, while a skittish one might bolt, revealing its unsuitability for pulling plows or carts. The finest mounts stood aloof, their braided manes threaded with colored ribbons denoting breeds or lineages as proudly as a noble's heraldry. Yet even the humblest donkey had value, its ability to carry sacks of grain making it worth half a year's wages to a peasant family. Poultry sellers created a cacophony of their own hens clucking in wicker cages, geese hissing at curious children who poked fingers through the slats. Eggs were candled against the sunlight to prove their freshness. The sellers practiced eye-spotting blood spots or irregularities invisible to amateurs. Ducks destined for roasting were force-fed grain to fatten their livers, while songbirds in tiny cages sold as living ornaments for wealthy households added their trills to the din. But the true theater unfolded during auctions, where the rapid-fire chant of the auctioneer turned commerce into poetry. Buyers signaled with nods, finger taps, or the lift of a staff, each gesture a language honed over generations. A milk cow's price might soar if she calmly let a stranger milk her mid-auction, proving her steady temperament, while a sheep's fleece unrolled like parchment to showcase its length and fineness. The best stockmen read animals like books, spotting the ewe whose lambs always thrived or the ox whose shoulders showed years of steady labor ahead. These transactions pulsed with unspoken calculations. A farmer selling his last pig might haggle fiercely, knowing its price meant shoes for his children, while a lord steward purchased entire flocks without blinking, his tally sticks notching numbers that would feed a castle's retinue through lean months. Animals weren't just commodities, they were futures measured in wool clips, plow seasons, and litters. When the last pen emptied and the dust settled, the marketplace had done more than move livestock. It had woven another thread into the fabric of survival itself. Between the livestock pens and the spice stalls, a different kind of magic unfolded, one that spoke directly to the stomach. Clouds of fragrant steam rose from makeshift kitchens where vendors cooked in plain view, turning simple ingredients into hot, ready meals for anyone with a few coins to spare. The sizzle of meat hitting a griddle was the universal dinner bell, drawing laborers wiping sweat from their brows, merchants between deals, and wide-eyed children clutching their parents' sleeves. This was fast food, medieval style, where every bite told a story of convenience, ingenuity, and the sheer human love of something hot and fresh. Take the humble meat pie, its flaky crust crimped by calloused fingers that knew dough better than their own palm lines. These portable feasts could be stuffed with anything from minced pork to eels, their fillings seasoned with whatever spices the vendor could afford. A worker might cradle one in his hands like a treasure, the pastry's heat seeping through to warm his fingers on a chilly morning. The first bite was always risky. Would it be bland or peppery, mostly gristle or generous with meat? But that was part of the thrill. Street food wasn't just sustenance, it was edible gambling. Nearby, chestnuts crackled in iron pans, their shells splitting like tiny fireworks to reveal the golden sweetness within. Vendors used long-handled spoons to stir them constantly, the nuts bouncing and blackening in just the right places. A penny bought a twist of parchment filled with this winter luxury, the buyer blowing on each nut to cool it before peeling away the charred skin. Across the way, apples impaled on sticks turned slowly over coals, their skins wrinkling as the fruit inside softened into caramelized perfection. The vendor might drizzle them with honey or crushed nuts, turning fruit into festival fare. But the true showstoppers were the spiced wine stalls, where copper cauldrons simmered with mixtures that could make a monk reconsider his vows. Mulled wine wasn't just alcohol, it was medicine, social lubricant, and hand warmer all in one. Cinnamon sticks bobbed like tiny driftwood, while cloves and star anise perfumed the air with every stir of the ladle. The vendor might toss in a handful of raisins or a slice of orange for the wealthy, their cups rimmed with sugar that melted into the first sip. Drinkers huddled close, not just for warmth but for the camaraderie that came with shared indulgence. The cooking fires themselves were engineering marvels. Portable clay ovens radiated heat for flatbreads slapped directly onto their inner walls, while tripod-mounted kettles bubbled with stews thickened with day-old bread. Skewers of lamb or chicken turned on horizontal spits, their fat dripping onto roasting vegetables below, a primitive but effective flavor infusion. Safety was improvisational. A sudden gust could send sparks dancing toward fabric stalls, prompting shouts and the occasional bucket toss. Yet somehow, amid the chaos, these culinary alchemists produced minor miracles: crispy fritters dusted with sugar, cheese melted onto slabs of coarse bread, even early versions of kebabs with meat so tender it slid off the skewer. What made street food extraordinary wasn't just its taste, but its democracy. A duke might discreetly send a servant for spiced wine, while a beggar offered to tell fortunes for a nibble of pie. The smells alone became landmarks. Turn left at the garlic sausage smoke, right where the gingerbread scent grows strong. In an era before food storage, these vendors were lifelines, converting raw ingredients into instant comfort with nothing but fire, skill, and the relentless hustle of those who fed a city one hot meal at a time. Their legacy lingers in every food truck, every carnival funnel cake, every time someone pauses mid-errand because something on a grill smells too good to ignore. Suddenly, the marketplace's usual clamor would hush as a trumpet blast sliced through the air, a signal that stopped bartering mid-sentence and turned every head toward the town crier. Clad in a tabard emblazoned with the local lord's crest, he stood atop a wooden platform or barrel, his voice trained to carry over the din like a human bell tower. This wasn't just a man shouting, it was the medieval internet, the breaking news alert of its day, delivering everything from tax hikes to royal births with the same gravity. Oyez, oyez, the old French cry for hear ye, rolled off his tongue like a drumroll before the main event. The best criers were equal parts actor and authority, their cadence turning dry legal text into something resembling poetry. Watch how he'd pause dramatically after announcing a new curfew, letting the groans of alehouse keepers ripple through the crowd before continuing. A proclamation about grain prices might be delivered with a somber tone, while news of an upcoming fair came with a flourish, his arms sweeping wide as if physically scattering joy. Accuracy was sacred. A crier caught misquoting a decree could lose his ears or worse, so every syllable was drilled until it lived in his bones. These announcements weren't just heard, they were experienced. When a crier declared war, the marketplace might erupt in cheers or stunned silence, young men already mentally measuring themselves for armor. A pardon for prisoners could send families weeping to their knees, while a new tax assessment sparked muttered curses behind raised hands. The crier's words became immediate community property, dissected and debated before he'd even left the square. Did he say 5 pence per bushel or 5 pence per household? Does the feast day exemption apply to our village? Gossip bloomed in his wake like mushrooms after rain, but the crier's role went beyond bureaucracy. He was the town's living calendar, his voice marking time's passage. Harvest dues announced in autumn, Lenten restrictions proclaimed in winter, May Day revelries detailed in spring. Each season had its soundtrack. Some criers even sang their proclamations in simple melodies, turning civic duty into performance art. And woe to anyone who interrupted. Disturbing a crier mid-message was punishable by fines or public shaming, a rare instance where medieval society prioritized information over commerce. The genius of the system lay in its accessibility. Illiteracy didn't matter when news traveled through ears, not parchment. The crier repeated messages at key locations: market cross, church steps, tavern doors, ensuring even hinterland farmers got the word. His voice was the glue binding scattered villages into something resembling a coherent society. No stamps, no subscriptions, no algorithms, just a man with trained lungs and a hat pinned with official seals, proving that sometimes the oldest methods are the hardest to silence. Amid the market's clamor for spices and silks, another kind of trade hummed with quiet intensity: the sale of sacred objects that bridged earth and heaven. Pilgrims, their cloaks dusty from months on the road, crowded around stalls displaying tiny lead badges stamped with images of saints or shrines. These weren't mere trinkets, they were proof of devotion, wearable testaments to journeys made on blistered feet. A badge depicting St. Thomas Becket's shrine at Canterbury might dangle from a hat, its soft metallic sheen announcing the wearer had braved bandits and foul weather to reach hallowed ground. Other stalls offered amply small clay flasks, once filled with holy water or oil from lamps burning at sacred sites, now empty but still radiating sanctity to those who believed. The relics trade walked a fine line between reverence and commerce. A merchant might hold up a sliver of wood claimed to be from the true cross, his voice dropping to a whisper as he described its provenance. More skeptical buyers could opt for safer purchases: beeswax candles guaranteed to have been blessed by a bishop, or rosaries strung with berries said to mimic the drops of Christ's blood. The truly devout sought out contact relics, strips of cloth that had touched a saint's tomb, or even dust swept from shrine floors packaged in embroidered pouches. Skeptics scoffed, but for the faithful, these objects pulsed with invisible power, talismans against plague, famine, and damnation. Pilgrim tokens doubled as spiritual souvenirs and practical tools. A badge sewn onto a traveler's cloak served as both decoration and divine protection, its imagery, perhaps Saint Christopher carrying the Christ child, offering safe passage for future journeys. The poorest pilgrims might buy broken fragments of larger badges, their faith undiminished by the modest size of their memento. Wealthier visitors commissioned elaborate wax ex votos, miniature body parts molded in gratitude for healed limbs or rescued loved ones, to leave at altars. What made these stalls remarkable was their universality. A knight might haggle over a relic's authenticity, while a beggar traded her last coin for a candle to light in prayer. The same marketplace that supplied feasts and finery also fed souls, proving commerce and conviction weren't rivals but partners. Even the hucksters, those who hawked dubious dragon bones or feathers from angels' wings, served a purpose, their wares meeting a hunger for wonder in a world where the divine felt tantalizingly close. Behind every transaction lay a story of longing. A mother purchasing a St. Margaret badge hoped it would ease her daughter's childbirth. A sailor with a St. Nicholas medal sought calm seas. The marketplace didn't judge the sincerity of these hopes. It simply provided the tangible tokens that made faith feel graspable. In an age before mass printing, these humble objects cast in lead, molded in wax, or stitched onto cloth were the emojis of devotion, conveying prayers too deep for words. Their presence turned the market into more than a hub of exchange. It became a temporary cathedral where heaven and earth did business side by side. Between the legs of bartering adults and beneath the baskets of overhanging goods, the marketplace thrummed with the energy of children, tiny figures weaving through the crowd like minnows in a fast-moving stream. Their games required no fancy toys. A knucklebone tossed against a wall became a game of skill, while a simple hoop rolled with a stick could spark hours of competition. Watch how they'd pause mid-chase to gawk at a juggler's tricks or cluster around the honey cellar, their eyes wide as he drizzled golden syrup onto wooden paddles for a penny. This was their school of life, where lessons came in the form of dodging cartwheels, counting coins for sweets, and learning the art of the deal by trading marbles or cherry pits like miniature merchants. Some children were there out of necessity, not play. Apprentices as young as 7 trailed after masters, hauling tools or holding yarn while absorbing trades that would feed them for life. Others, less fortunate, darted between stalls with practiced hands, a quick grab at an unattended apple, a strategic bump to loosen a pastry from a distracted shopper's grip. But even hardship couldn't stifle their ingenuity. A broken pottery shard became a makeshift shovel for digging pretend forts in the dirt between stalls, while a length of discarded rope turned into a tug-of-war contest near the animal pens. Festival days transformed the market into a child's paradise. Puppet shows drew squealing crowds as wooden knights battled dragons, their strings manipulated by performers whose voices leapt an octave for comic effect. Parents might splurge on a spun sugar confection, watching their offspring lick sticky fingers with reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. And then there were the games of chance, a toss of a coin into a cup, a blindfolded stab at a painted wheel where victory meant a tin whistle or a handful of nuts, and defeat was soothed by the eternal promise of next time. What made their presence magical was how they blurred the lines between observer and participant. A group might erupt into spontaneous song, mimicking the troubadour's ballad with exaggerated bravado. Little girls practiced bargaining with pebbles as currency, while boys reenacted jousting tournaments with broom handles for lances. Their laughter was the market's most honest currency, ringing above the haggling and hammering, a reminder that even in an age of toil and survival, wonder found a way to flourish. In their unfiltered joy, they turned the marketplace into something more than a hub of commerce. It became a stage for the pure, unscripted theater of childhood. Beneath the market's vibrant surface lurked a shadow world where nimble fingers and silver tongues thrived. Pickpockets worked the crowd like invisible artists, their hands darting into pouches with the precision of surgeons. A distracted merchant might later find his coin purse lighter, the only clue a slit in the fabric so fine it seemed woven by spiders. These thieves weren't lone wolves. They operated in networks, using signals as subtle as a cough or a tugged ear to coordinate their next mark. A child might bump into a shopper's legs, while an accomplice lifted a dagger from the victim's belt, their teamwork honed to silent perfection. Fraudsters turned deception into high art. A spice merchant might mix sawdust with saffron, weighting the bottom of his sacks with pebbles to disguise the cheat. Wine cellars diluted their vintages with water or worse vinegar masked with honey, while tailors stitched inferior linens between layers of fine fabric, their scams only unraveling weeks later. The most brazen tricksters sold magic amulets guaranteed to ward off plague or attract love, their promises as hollow as the dried gourds they passed off as dragon eggs. When tempers flared, the market could erupt into chaos. A dispute over a short measured sack of grain might escalate into a brawl, fists flying amid overturned stalls. Drunkenness fueled countless scuffles, especially near ale sellers' rows, where insults about a man's ancestry or the quality of his hat could spark violence faster than a smith's hammer struck iron. Bloodied noses and shattered pride were common currency in these clashes, though serious injuries often brought the sheriff's men crashing down like a portcullis. Justice here was swift and theatrical. A caught thief might be clamped into the stocks, his ears nailed to the wood if the offense was grave. Villagers relished these spectacles, pelting the offender with rotten fruit or dung, a humiliating lesson in morality for all to see. Fines hit wallets hard, especially for merchants caught selling spoiled meat or rigged scales. Some towns employed cucking stools, dunking dishonest bakers or brewers into fetid water until they gasped for mercy. The message was clear: the market's trust was fragile, and those who broke it paid dearly. Yet for all its dangers, this underbelly was part of the market's raw vitality. The same crowds that hid pickpockets also allowed serfs to gossip about oppressive lords. The same chaos that bred brawls let forbidden books change hands beneath butchers' counters. Risk and reward danced an eternal waltz here, proving that even in the Middle Ages, humanity's best and worst impulses thrived side by side, their stories etched not in parchment, but in the scuff marks of the stocks and the whispered warnings between buyers to "watch your purse, friend." As autumn's chill sharpened in the air, the marketplace shed its everyday skin and erupted into a riot of seasonal magic. Evergreen boughs woven with scarlet ribbons arched over stalls, their piney perfume cutting through the usual smells of fish and leather. Christmas wasn't just a day in the medieval world, it was a weeks-long spectacle, and the market became its glittering stage. Vendors who normally peddled nails and flour now offered treasures that existed only in this fleeting window. Oranges from Moorish Spain, their dimpled skins like stolen sunlight in the depths of winter, or gingerbread so intricately molded into saints and animals that eating them felt like sacrilege. Even the poorest families scraped together coins for a single wax taper to add to the communal Yule log, its light a tiny defiance against the year's longest night. But Christmas was merely the crown jewel in a year-round cycle of festive markets. At Candlemas in February, stalls overflowed with candles of every size, beeswax for the wealthy, tallow for the frugal, each one blessed to ward off the lingering dark. Spring's May Day brought flower vendors threading blossoms into garlands, while young men competed to erect the tallest maypole, its ribbons fluttering like captured rainbows. Midsummer markets glowed with bonfire torches and wreaths of St. John's wort, peasants and nobles alike leaping over flames for luck as fiddlers played tunes older than the cobblestones. The goods themselves became seasonal characters in this annual theater. Autumn's Michaelmas markets featured goose feathers piled high for quilting and ink-making, the birds fattened on fallen grain. At Martinmas, the year's new wine flowed freely, its youthful tartness celebrated with roasted chestnuts and raucous songs. Even regional saints' days sparked micro-festivals. A Breton town might suddenly brim with seashell-decorated trinkets for St. Anne, while German villages peddled miniature wooden shoes in honor of St. Nicholas. Performers tailored acts to the calendar's rhythm. Mummers in animal masks acted out solstice rituals at Christmas, while Lent's approach brought somber morality plays where demons dragged gluttonous characters into papier-mâché helmets. Harvest festivals featured jugglers tossing apples instead of knives, and children's laughter rang louder than coin counts as puppet shows retold the story of the Nativity with a comic thief stealing the wise men's gifts. These events were more than commerce, they were communal heartbeats. A serf bound to his lord's land all year could taste fleeting equality sipping mulled wine beside a knight at the Christmas market. The strict hierarchies of daily life softened when everyone stood shoulder to shoulder watching a fire-eater's breath turn into a dragon's roar against the winter sky. For a few precious days, the marketplace wasn't just where you survived, it was where you remembered how to marvel. The spices might fade, the garlands wither, but the memory of those luminous moments of a shared cinnamon bun steaming in cold hands, of a child's wonder at their first glimpse of a sugar plum, those were the real goods no stall could ever sell, yet everyone carried home. The marketplace wasn't just a haphazard jumble of stalls, it was a meticulously orchestrated stage, its layout revealing the invisible hand of centuries of social and economic engineering. Step into the grandest market squares, and you'd find every stone, every column, every vaulted arcade whispering tales of civic pride and practicality. The well at the center wasn't merely a water source, it was the beating heart, its rim worn smooth by generations of hands drawing buckets to wash vegetables, quench thirst, or cool overheated brows after hours of bartering. Around it, the most coveted stalls radiated outward like spokes on a wheel, spice merchants and goldsmiths claiming prime real estate, their wares too precious to risk at the fringes where thieves and mud might lurk. Wealthy towns flaunted their prosperity through architecture. Covered arcades with soaring timber beams sheltered delicate fabrics and parchment from rain, their roofs often adorned with carved saints or mythical beasts to bless the commerce below. In Flanders, cloth halls doubled as market spaces, their soaring belfries serving as both timekeepers and symbols of merchant power, because time, after all, was money long before clocks ticked in every home. Contrast this with poorer villages, where markets might sprawl across a muddy field, stalls cobbled together from driftwood and frayed rope, yet still thrumming with the same energy as their grander counterparts. Guild halls loomed at the edges like silent overseers, their stone facades etched with the tools of their trades, a baker's loaf, a blacksmith's hammer, reminding all who passed that quality was policed by collective might. These weren't just offices, they were fortresses of tradition, where apprenticeships were sealed with handshakes and fines for shoddy workmanship were doled out like moral lessons. Nearby, the pillory or stocks stood as stark warnings against cheating, their presence proof that trust was the market's true currency, but the true genius lay in the flow. Wide lanes allowed ox carts to deliver grain without trampling shoppers, while narrower alleys between stalls created intimate spaces for haggling over silks or spices. In Italy, some markets had tiered steps so vendors could display wares at eye level, turning shopping into theater. Northern towns often built permanent butchers' rows with tiled floors and drainage channels, a grim but necessary innovation where blood and offal could be sluiced away before sunrise. Even the placement of the fishmonger downwind of the bread stalls wasn't accidental. It was medieval zoning at its most pragmatic. The market's bones told deeper stories too. A town with a grand cloth hall signaled wool as its lifeblood, while one with a vast grain market revealed fields of golden wheat stretching to the horizon. Covered markets in rainy regions boasted steeply pitched roofs to shed downpours, while sun-baked Mediterranean squares featured shaded colonnades where merchants napped through the scorching midday lull. Every architectural choice, from the thickness of the butter crosses steps to the height of the cheese loft shelves, was a love letter to local identity. What's astonishing is how these designs still echo today. The open plaza inviting chance encounters, that's the medieval market square reborn as a shopping mall atrium. The food trucks lining city blocks, direct descendants of the pie sellers and chestnut roasters who clustered near church steps. Even the humble farmer's market, with its artisanal jams and hand-thrown pottery, owes its DNA to those cobbled spaces where every purchase came with a story, a smile, or a shouted curse across the crowded square. The buildings may have crumbled, but their blueprints for human connection endure. Silk unfurling across a merchant's arm carried more than just luxury. It whispered of camel caravans plodding across deserts so vast they swallowed entire seasons. These weren't mere fabrics, they were passports stamped with the dust of the Silk Road, each shimmering thread proof that the medieval marketplace was as globally connected as any modern port. The spices heaped in wooden bowls told even wilder tales: peppercorns that had sailed past monsoon-racked coasts, cloves plucked from trees on islands so remote their very existence sounded like myth. Every exotic item on these stalls was a handshake between civilizations, a tangible piece of the world's puzzle clicking into place. Foreign merchants were the human bridges linking these distant shores. A Venetian trader's booth might display glass so clear it rivaled crystal, his accent thick with the musical lilt of the Adriatic, as he explained how Moorish craftsmen in Spain had taught his ancestors new techniques. Beside him, a Norse fur dealer could be haggling over pelts, his cloak fastened with a brooch from Kiev, while his stories spun of frozen rivers where sables were trapped. These weren't just vendors, they were accidental diplomats, their wares sparking conversations that dissolved borders. A housewife buying Levantine raisins might learn to sweeten her pies with cinnamon instead of honey, while a tailor admiring Persian embroidery could adapt its motifs into his own designs. The real magic lay in the cultural cross-pollination. A merchant from Damascus might demonstrate how to grind coffee beans in a brass ibrick, his tiny cup of thick, cardamom-scented brew shocking local palates accustomed only to ale or wine. In return, he'd carry home tales of Gothic cathedrals and the peculiar northern custom of kissing under mistletoe. Language itself bent and blended in these interactions. Words like sugar, from Arabic sukkar, or mattress, from Arabic matra, seeped into European vocabularies as smoothly as silk slid through a noblewoman's fingers. But this exchange wasn't always peaceful. Rival trading blocs like the Hanseatic League wielded economic power like a cudgel, blockading ports or imposing tariffs that could starve a city into submission. Some foreign merchants faced suspicion or violence, their goods desired but their religions and customs mocked. Yet even tension-bred innovation, Italian bankers developed letters of credit to avoid transporting bullion through bandit-ridden passes, while Jewish traders established networks of trusted agents spanning from Cairo to Cologne. The marketplace became a living atlas. A shopper could trace the Rhine's course by the progression of wines on offer, or guess a cloth's origin by its weave, the tight practicality of Flemish wool versus the airy delicacy of Indian muslin. Every transaction was a thread in a vast, invisible web connecting fishers off Iceland's coast to pearl divers in the Persian Gulf, all converging in this cacophony of barter and banter. To walk these stalls was to journey the world without leaving town, each purchase a stamp in an imaginary passport proving that even in the Middle Ages, no one truly lived in isolation. Nothing lasts forever, not even the bustling medieval marketplace that had thrived for centuries. By the late Middle Ages, the familiar symphony of haggling merchants and clattering carts began to fade, replaced by the steady hum of a changing world. Cities swelled beyond their walls, and the once open squares where farmers bartered directly with townsfolk gave way to permanent shops lining cobbled streets. These weren't just architectural shifts, they were revolutions in how people connected with goods, with each other, with the rhythm of daily life. The butcher no longer needed to shout over competitors. His wares now sat behind a glass-paned window, his name painted proudly above the door. The spice merchant, once a temporary exotic visitor, might lease a timber-framed storefront year-round, his jars of saffron and cinnamon displayed like jewels in a permanent cabinet of curiosities. Trade itself transformed beneath these surface changes. The rise of banking houses meant deals no longer required chests of coins dragged through muddy streets. a letter of credit from a Florentine financier could purchase Flemish wool as easily as a handshake once bought a basket of apples. Craft guilds, once the backbone of market quality control, now faced competition from rural cottage industries where families spun thread or wove cloth beyond the reach of urban regulations. Even the concept of time shifted. The market's dawn-to-dusk rhythm yielded to shops keeping regular hours, their ironclad shutters opening and closing with the precision of clock towers newly erected in town squares. Yet for all these modernizations, something intangible was lost. The marketplace had been more than a shopping district. It was the town's living room, its news source, its theater. Where once a shopper might pause to hear a minstrel's ballad or debate politics with a stranger while selecting fish, now transactions grew quieter, more private. The communal ovens where villagers baked bread together stood half empty as wealthier households built their own kitchen hearths. Even the smells changed. The mingling aromas of roasting chestnuts, tanned leather, and fresh dung that had once created the market's distinctive perfume now gave way to the isolated sense of specialized districts, the tannery's stench relegated downstream, the flour mills clustered by the river's power. Remarkably, echoes of the medieval marketplace refused to vanish entirely. Annual fairs became time capsules of the old ways, where for a few glorious days the chaos and color returned. The Great Fair of Champagne or England's Stourbridge Fair might draw merchants from a dozen lands, their temporary stalls resurrecting the international bazaar atmosphere that permanent shops couldn't replicate. Peddlers kept the wandering tradition alive, their packs brimming with ribbons, needles, and news from distant towns. And in quieter corners of Europe, some market squares stubbornly retained their ancient layouts, the stones worn smooth by centuries of footprints, still hosting weekly markets where farmers sold cheese from cloth-draped tables as their ancestors had done. What truly survived, though, was the spirit. Modern farmers' markets with their artisanal breads and heirloom vegetables, direct descendants of those medieval gatherings. Flea markets where haggling is expected and every stall holds surprises. Spiritual heirs to the rag and bone traders of old. Even online marketplaces, for all their digital remove, replicate the medieval model of bringing buyer and seller face to face, albeit through screens instead of across a barrel of pickled herring. The medieval marketplace didn't so much disappear as evolve, its DNA woven into how we shop, socialize, and experience community. Those crowded, fragrant, noisy squares taught humanity the enduring lesson that commerce thrives best when it's personal, when it leaves room for the unexpected conversation, the shared laugh, the sense that every purchase, whether a silk gown or a turnip, is part of a story far larger than the transaction itself. Our journey through the medieval marketplace leaves us not just with echoes of the past, but with a startling realization. These bustling squares were the original social networks, the first global marketplaces, and the beating hearts of communities long before our modern conveniences existed. Think about it, every scent of saffron or clove was a whisper of distant lands, every clatter of the blacksmith's hammer a reminder of interdependence, every burst of laughter from children playing between stalls proof that commerce and community have always been intertwined. These weren't just settings for transactions, they were theaters of human connection where the rhythm of daily life played out in real time. What's extraordinary is how much of that medieval DNA survives in today's world. Wander through a farmer's market now, and you'll catch glimpses of that old magic, the banter between vendor and customer, the way a perfectly ripe strawberry still stops us in our tracks, the communal joy of sharing a hot meal at a food truck. Online marketplaces, they're the digital descendants of those Silk Road merchants, bridging continents with a click instead of camel caravans. Even the hustle of a weekend flea market, with its haggling and hidden treasures, carries the same thrill medieval shoppers felt discovering Venetian glass or Flemish wool. But perhaps the most enduring legacy lies in how these spaces shaped society itself. The marketplace taught generations how to negotiate, how to judge quality, how to spot a scam, skills as vital now as they were then. It was the original school of hard knocks, where a child learned arithmetic by counting coins, and a farmer's wife honed diplomacy bartering eggs for salt. The fairness enforced by guilds and town criers evolved into today's consumer protections, while the seasonal festivals live on in our holiday markets and county fairs. As the echoes of those cobblestone streets fade, they leave us with a question. In our age of one-click purchases and sterile superstores, have we lost something essential? The medieval marketplace didn't just feed bodies, it nourished curiosity, sparking conversations between strangers over shared tastes or unfamiliar crafts. It rewarded patience, no overnight shipping, just the anticipation of the spice caravan's annual return. Most of all, it reminded everyone, from lord to laborer, that they were part of something larger, a web of growers, makers, and dreamers stretching across mountains and oceans. So the next time you pause at a bakery window, inhale the scent of fresh bread and feel that primal pull toward connection, remember, you're not just smelling flour and yeast. You're stepping into a tradition as old as those medieval ovens, part of an unbroken chain that turns simple ingredients into shared humanity. If this journey through time has made you see markets past or present with fresh eyes, let us know in the comments. And for more adventures where history comes alive, don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, may your bargains be fair, your bread always warm, and your curiosity never run out of stalls to explore.